Welcome to the Capitol Forum's 6th Annual Antitrust Thought Leader Series, sponsored by KL Discovery. I'm Sally Hubbard, and I'm here with Caroline Holland. Welcome, Caroline.
Thanks for having me, Sally. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
So one of the big issues right now is big tech, and a lot of different high-profile things have been happening. And the question has been raised, does antitrust have a role to play in handling big tech? What are your views on that?
So I think the answer is yes. I will follow on that question with the other one is antitrust up to the task? Can antitrust handle it? This has been kind of an age-old question since I ever became involved in antitrust, where I feel like we spent a lot of time in the late 2000s saying, yes, antitrust can handle tech. It is nimble, it is flexible, the standards are flexible, and it can evolve over time. That's one of the benefits of being a case law-driven law, is that it can evolve and adapt to growing technology. So I think absolutely it is up to the task, and it's going to play a role. I do think, however, we need to be somewhat reflective, self-reflective, those of us in the antitrust community who have been enforcers, to think, what could we be doing different or better? Is there anything we could be doing different or better? So I think this growing dialogue about antitrust, particularly in the tech space, is a good thing. It's a good thing to have these conversations.
And there's a lot of calls, since a lot of people don't really understand antitrust law. The main call is break them up. And people don't understand kind of the different ways that antitrust law can be used. Mm-hmm. Now, in your view, is the solution to break them up? Is that what we should be doing?
So it's certainly a possible remedy. If antitrust enforcers were to uncover some significant anti-competitive conduct that truly shut down competition in a market and rose to that level, it should absolutely be on the table as a remedy. Do I think it's a likely remedy? Probably not. We haven't seen that kind of conduct, so I don't think it's a likely remedy. It should be on the table. I think there are some other areas, though, where we can be thinking about how to address the concerns about the concentration and the power of big tech. One of those is in the merger space. I think the antitrust enforcers have been thinking about these issues and will continue to, but I think there are three areas where they should be more skeptical of mergers and can be more aggressive in challenging them. That's first when it comes to potential competition. If the strategy of one of these big companies is to buy up a company before it becomes competitively significant, to shut it out, I think that's somewhere where the enforcers should be very skeptical of that tactic and aggressive in stopping it. I think we'll see more in the vertical space. To the extent that tech companies are becoming more vertically integrated, they should be very skeptical again and probing as to whether some vertical integration will result in foreclosure that will really stifle competition and innovation. The final point, building on this innovation theme, is where might there be a loss of innovation from a merger? I think enforcers, I think academics have been looking hard at this issue. Europe has been very forward-thinking in this. We should really be thinking about, could mergers be shutting down innovation? Because at the end of the day, I think what we all want to see in the tech space is a competitive, vibrant, innovative ecosystem. That's where good things happen for consumers and where good things happen, frankly, for our economy.
And we're starting to also see a convergence of privacy law with antitrust law, and particularly that's happening in Europe with some of the German enforcement against Facebook, for example, their investigation of Facebook. And we've seen some high-profile issues recently involving privacy breaches. How do you see privacy coming into play with antitrust law, or do you see those two coming together, or what do you think is the relationship between the two?
So I think that, so we've heard a lot of calls for, well, maybe the whole Facebook Cambridge Analytica thing wouldn't have happened if there was more competition. And companies should be competing on the basis of the kind of privacy they offer consumers. I think competition would certainly be good for privacy. You would hope in a competitive market there'd be some competition based on the type of privacy offerings. However, it's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to address all the concerns. And its competition is somewhat limited in the sense that in these very highly networked type markets in social media, for example, I think consumers largely don't want 6 different social media companies. The whole benefit is having one with everyone in your network in there. So yes, on the margins it could be beneficial, but I don't think we should look to competition to solve all of the problem. But I do think competition policy and enforcers should be very alert to what reactions the tech industry is having to these privacy concerns. For example, Facebook has said, post this Cambridge Analytica revelation, that they are really going to tighten up their APIs. APIs are the application programming interfaces that that programs use basically to talk to each other. So a innovator, app developer may want to interface with Facebook and get data, and I'll preface that with not personal information or specific information, but data and other information that users can authorize with the proper consent and notice and clear understanding they're authorizing that, to develop cool new apps and things that people may can use the platform to do. And one concern I think we should all be alert for is to the extent that Facebook starts to shut off those APIs, limit access to them, and restrict who can use them, how they're doing that. Are they able to use privacy and security as a guise for shutting out competitors? You know, maybe they see potential app developers as competition, and the opportunity to shut them out because of privacy or security concerns could be a tactic they use. I don't know that for sure. I'm just thinking that we need to be looking for some of these red flags and the responses to how companies deal with privacy.
Well, certainly closing the API would lead to greater vertical integration, right? So some of the issues that you raised earlier could come to the fore. One thing about how competition can come into play with these privacy issues, I know after the recent scandal about Cambridge Analytica getting Facebook user data, that a lot of Facebook users wanted to leave the platform, but didn't really feel like they had an alternative. So to some degree, isn't that lack of choice kind of allowing these companies to get away with these types of tactics without having it really affect their business in a meaningful way?
It's a really good question. It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg question, right? Like, would there be more competition if people could more easily port all of their information and data to a competitor, or do people not really want to do that, and that's why it hasn't happened? But I think that brings up some really interesting issues about data portability, interoperability, some of the tools that enforcers might have, either antitrust enforcers, or if antitrust enforcers don't have the conduct necessary to sort of force remedies, what policies might Congress want to think about when trying to promote a more competitive ecosystem? And that might be not just you can download your data, but you can download your data in a machine-readable format that will be conducive to a competitor being able to pull that information and then also use it. I think the most important thing is use it to help you get your friends onto that new network. This might bring up some trade-offs. On the one hand, it would be great to be able to port all your friends and let all your friends know you're going to this new platform. But does that bring up some corresponding privacy concerns? If the new platform is using your friend information, who you're friends with, to reach out to them. So, there's going to be a balancing here.
Yeah, and some folks have said that interoperability is another way to go about this instead of just portability. Interoperability, so for example, how we have email systems that communicate with one another. So if you had another social network that could communicate with Facebook, I mean, what do you think about that solution?
I think that's another one where that's an interesting idea for how do we help promote competition. And I think a lot of this debate about big tech is for sort of ordinary observers, people who don't know anything about antitrust or the law, just sort of feel trapped or feel held within this ecosystem that they can't get out of. And so, look, if the companies were willing to do things like that on their own because they're under the public pressure to do so, that would be great. Self-regulation is not always the most effective way to go. So this is bringing up some real questions as to whether interoperability, like, for example, allowing WhatsApp users to message Signal users or other messaging systems. How do you force interoperability? Is that through antitrust law because you find some sort of common carrier type situation? Is that through regulation to say, look, this messaging system is essential way of communicating, and you need to open up to interoperability? Is that done through congressional legislation, or is that done through a regulator? I think that to the extent some of these questions are answered with non-antitrust solutions, it raises a real prospect that there may be a desire to create some sort of new regulator that's going to be sort of the consumer ombudsman, the consumer digital regulator that can maybe be housed within the FTC as part of the FTC or as a new entity to really take on a lot of these issues and be able to regulate in a way that is broader than simply the antitrust laws can do.
Right. I mean, I don't think we can count on the companies themselves to voluntarily pursue interoperability or portability. And one thing that I found quite disconcerting about the recent congressional hearings with Mark Zuckerberg were the extent that members of Congress seemed to be asking for permission to regulate Facebook. In the past, when Congress was going to regulate, say, an oil company for saying you're not allowed to dump oil into the ocean, they weren't, saying, Exxon, is that okay with you? Will you cooperate with this? So what do you think is the reason, or what do you think is going on there in terms of the regulatory stance toward these tech companies?
So, I wouldn't read too much into how Congress is going about it. It might just be the nature of, senators not wanting to be terribly confrontational, or at the very least giving an opportunity to Facebook to be able to respond to, well, should we be regulating you? Give us your answer. That's sort of the give and take of, if we're going to start legislating, we want to make sure we had a fair forum for the company or entity that would be regulated or legislated about a chance to make their pitch for why or why not. So I'm not too worried about that. What I'm a little more worried about is that this is maybe a fleeting moment, and with everything, what next new shiny issue is going to come along to Congress, and will we really see meaningful legislation at the end of the day, whether that's enhancing the FTC's authority or something even more broad or more expansive than that. I worry that there might be a little momentum that is lost just by virtue of the news cycle. But I think that the public, the grassroots organizations are really seizing onto this as something that is extremely important, not only to competition, which we care about, but to, frankly, our democracy and our social fabric.
Yeah, I question whether it will be fleeting, because it seems that these issues are just going to keep compounding and getting more and more common and severe, especially as tech continues to evolve. I mean, the Internet of Things is coming. A lot of more technology that's going to be really impacting privacy is just getting more and more developed. So it might be true that it's at this moment of time a hot issue, but these problems are certainly not going away.
I hope you're right, and I think you are right. I think maybe the privacy issue will be a little bit come and go, the flashiness of the Facebook issue. I don't think the competition questions are going away.
Right.
I think those will always be there. You may have spikes in this privacy breach or this privacy issue, but the competition issues I think are real. They are here to stay, and this is why I think we need some real thought leadership on what are the right ways to apply the antitrust laws. Where do we need to be thinking more novelly? Because I think just as important as the issues of today are, we need to be thinking about the issues of tomorrow, the voice assistants, the home assistants, the Internet of Things, everything being connected. What issues do we need to red flag and highlight for enforcers to be looking at and be thinking about as we move forward in this technological revolution.
And you mentioned earlier that you questioned whether there was actually conduct for antitrust enforcers to go after. At the Capitol Forum, I've been documenting that conduct. So, we've been writing about different practices that we do think violate the antitrust laws or could create antitrust risk for these companies. I think, there has been an issue of political will to go after the tech platforms, but we've seen, antitrust enforcement in the EU, and a lot of those cases, like, for example, the Google Android case, are very similar to past enforcement in the United States, like the US versus Microsoft case. Do you think that political will is changing and that we might start to see more enforcement as a result of the change in administration?
So I think those with concerns and those who have facts and evidence ought to keep knocking on those doors at DOJ and FTC. I think there probably is a desire to find strong facts, strong evidence to be able to bring that seminal case. The question is sort of how strong do those facts need to be, and the correlation between the strength of the facts and evidence and that political will to bring it. So I think those with concerns need to keep hammering those home and not be discouraged by lack of enforcement, because I do think the agencies want to hear, they want to know what problems there are, and I think the incoming leadership of the FTC and the current leadership at DOJ, I think they hear the concerns, I think they hear the public sentiment, and if there's a case to bring that they think they have a decent shot of winning, I think I'm remaining hopeful.
All right, well, Caroline, thank you so much for your time today. It's been such an interesting discussion.
Enjoyed it, likewise. Thanks so much for having me.